Hello, everybody. My name's Luke, and I'm here with my brother Chad McBain, and we are two brothers in Bitcoin. And today, Chad, you sent me a video, which again, I think the Bitcoin space is full of surprises. It's full of like things you sort of don't believe are actually happening, and they are happening, and not a lot of people are talking about it. Uh, I mean, we are talking
Right.
about it, but just because we're interested. But it seems like the significance of what is going on escapes a lot of people when it comes to Bitcoin. And as we previously discussed, it's a technology that's going to change us more and more. Just like artificial intelligence, obviously, is going to change the way we work and live. And Bitcoin, and I think people are aware of that. But with Bitcoin, I think there's still, interesting enough, not a lot of awareness. And today, so should we just dive into the video? Should we look at it first and then talk about it, or would you like to say some words before
But
we?
yeah, I guess just before we get started, for those that don't follow the financial world, the person that's going to be speaking is a gentleman named Larry Fink, and he's the head of BlackRock, which many of us have heard of, but maybe don't really know a lot about. But BlackRock, long story short, is probably the largest holder of private investments in the world. They manage, it depends on the day, but typically about $10 trillion of money globally. So that's there's a lot of zeros at the end of that. I don't know how many, but a lot. And so he's just being asked about what he thinks about Bitcoin in the video. And I think, as somebody who heads a company that manages $10 trillion in assets, I think his opinion, at least in the financial world, holds a lot of weight.
Yeah, one should think so. And
Yeah.
I mean, BlackRock also is a well-known name. Everybody knows BlackRock by now. One of these.
For better or worse, yeah.
Yeah, right. So I think that's probably the tagline which we're going to run with this video to attract the attention there. And it's good that you know also something about the volume in which this company trades in. And well, let's have a look what this gentleman has to say about Bitcoin. And I'm just going to share the screen. And here we go. And without further comment from my side, let's look at this. This is a interview from CNBC with CEO Larry Fink. And let's have a listen.
I know you have been a leader in willing to embrace crypto. You
Yeah.
have made it so that people can be in Bitcoin. We hear that you are thinking about Ethereum. These are incredible things. How now? BlackRock is not known as a gunslinger by any means. So you obviously must believe that this maybe is an alternative. Is this an alternative in order to be able, because of a deficit, maybe something long term people should have?
Absolutely. As you know, I was a skeptic.
Yes.
I was a proud skeptic. And I studied it.
Let me just pause that here. I mean, that's how I also remember vaguely how these investment companies viewed Bitcoin very skeptically. So do
Right.
you remember that he was like the past skeptical, or there were statements done by BlackRock where they commented on Bitcoin?
Yeah. I mean, before I even got into Bitcoin, uh, they were very skeptical, and BlackRock, I remember, had, well, it was interesting. I can remember in 2021, Larry Fink saying that he didn't think it was an asset, but he thought the jury was still out. But he made comments previously in 2017, 2018, that he didn't think it was real. There was any real value there. But I also remember in 2021, I'll probably mess up his title, the CFO or the CTO, but one of the high-ranking executives at BlackRock thought that there was something to Bitcoin, and said that Larry just needed to put the time in to research it that he had. And so here we are several years later, and I think he even talks about it in this interview. He admits that he didn't spend a lot of time. and he has since spent a lot of time. So, take that with a healthy degree of skepticism, because they do now have a Bitcoin ETF. But I don't believe that they would involve their investors if they didn't believe in the product. So, and they currently have, I believe, close to $20 billion of investment in their ETF that they just launched in January. So again, while I'm not necessarily Larry Fink's biggest fan, I think that what he has to say holds a lot of weight in the financial community and the political community globally. And what he's saying here is, I was a skeptic, but I've changed my mind. So let's hear the rest of it, I guess.
It's good to get some context from you, to also remind ourselves that, of course, now they have some skin in the game with their Bitcoin ETF. So he's
Right.
not going to badmouth Bitcoin anymore because, he'd be acting against his own interests. But these developments are interesting in terms of these public statements, from there's nothing there, it's not an asset, to, oh, now I just needed to invest some time in terms of understanding what it is. And I think, again, just to reiterate that point, is that sometimes people do make public statements, people who are very influential, well known, have a lot of weight, people listen to them, and they make these public statements and they actually don't know what they're talking about.
Right.
So also this way, one should reflect on that these experts and let's say people who are high up in this hierarchy of in this financial world sometimes make statements about things which they, as they now admit, haven't put in the time to really read into and understand.
Right.
Let's back it up a little bit and get back.
I was a skeptic.
Yes.
I was a proud skeptic. And I studied it, learned about it, and I came away saying, okay, my opinion 5 years ago was wrong. Here's my opinion today. This is what I believe in today. I believe the opportunity today. I believe Bitcoin is legitimate. I'm not trying to say there's not misuses like everything else, but it is a legitimate financial instrument that allows you to have maybe uncorrelated, non-correlated type of returns. I believe it is an instrument that you invest in when you're more frightened, though.
Hang on, did I just hear this correctly? It's an instrument if you're more frightened, though? Like, this is, when I just heard that, I was going like, what? What is he saying? Like, I thought this is something you should not invest if you're like risk averse, right? That's what you usually heard. Don't invest in Bitcoin if like if you can't stomach the fluctuations, you might even lose everything. So that sort of scares people off a lot. Now he's saying, if you're frightened, you should invest in Bitcoin.
I think they're on a time crunch there, I'm sure, because it's cable television. But I think what he's trying to say is, if you're concerned or have fear about the current financial system, and he discusses a little bit about that later, I think, in terms of inflation, or maybe you live in a country where you don't trust the government. So let's hear him finish, and then we'll decide what he was thinking.
Okay, let's give him a chance.
An instrument that you invest in when you're more frightened, though. It is an instrument when you believe that countries are debasing their currency, debasing their currency by excess deficits, and some countries are. I believe we have countries where you're frightened of your everyday existence, and if you have an opportunity to invest in something that is outside your country's control, then you can have more financial control. And so I'm a major believer that there is a role for Bitcoin in portfolios. I believe you're going to see that as one of the asset classes that we all look at. I look at it as digital gold, as I said before, and I do believe there's a real need for everyone to look at it as one alternative to, I would say, the optimism that I have in the world. If you want to hedge hope, Bitcoin is not an instrument for hope unless you're hopeful you're going to make a lot of money on it. But I look at it as a vehicle in which you're expressing your financial acumen in something that you're more frightened of the world, you're more frightened of your existence. And I believe there's a great induction.
I gotta stop this because he's saying so many different things, and I just want to because before we go on too much, and because he's making several statements. One of them is that if you feel the feeling that you don't have control over your financial circumstances, by which he probably means if you live in a country which has high inflation rates, right? And you feel like you don't have any influence on that. So I think that's what he's talking about when he says that.
I believe so, although he does make a comment about your faith in government. So it could be something as simple as, let's use India as an example. A few years ago, they banned the $1,000 bill. I think it was 2017, 2018. They did it with 24 hours notice. So everybody was lined up trying to cash in, I guess, their $1,000 notes. Because they were about to become worthless. So there's a democratically elected government that in the span of 24 hours was about to make something worthless that obviously plenty of people held. So I think his point is, yes, probably more totalitarian governments or governments with high inflation that are printing money. Obviously, there's South American governments and many around the world, Lebanon. But I think he's talking about anybody who just might not have a lot of faith in their government when it comes to their currency. So that's how I take it.
Yeah, that's like the general sweeping statement, but I've also thought he's specifically making a point about countries which are maybe in a lot of trouble, and maybe countries of like the developing world. And
Right. Yep.
so he's not saying that explicitly, but that's what I read into that this is very attractive, or for people very attractive to put their savings there if they don't trust their governments, if they're exposed to the debasing of their currency and so on and so forth. And there's a number of countries where that is happening. And of course, I mean, you could also say, and also the statement which he makes at the end is very strange. Like he's talking about, well, this is nothing for you if you have great hopes, although you might have the hope of, the Bitcoin price rising and you making a lot of profit. But it's more for you if you're very afraid, or if you're afraid of the future. That didn't say very. And I was going like, what? So he's talking about digital gold. Of course, we've heard about that phrase before, that it's like digital gold. But thinking about like current events globally going on, and that there is this sense of insecurity in general, also in the West, people seem to be anxious, and there seems to be a lot of anxiety floating around and insecurity. Then basically he's also making the case for Bitcoin there as something.
Yeah, I think he's speaking to multiple crowds at once. So, it's not just the West. I mean, if you live in China and you have any degree of wealth, you might not have complete and total faith in your government to protect your wealth. Same in other totalitarian countries. However, to your point, and I think he's also making this point, if you live on the continent of Africa, many African countries, their currency inflates, 100, 150% annualized. And if you look at the usage on the Bitcoin network, some of the highest use cases are actually in African countries. Nigeria is one that springs to mind. About 40% of trade that happens in Nigeria is done with crypto. So I think he's speaking to that as well. But then I also think he's talking, and this is where I think it's getting confusing because he's lumping so much into a couple of minutes. I also think he's talking to the Wall Street crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to your point, when he says, if you have hope, Bitcoin's not for you, I think he's talking to the Wall Street crowd. If you believe that everything's fine here in the good old USA, then Bitcoin's not for you. But if you're a hedge fund or an investment group or an investment company, or even a private individual or a private wealth fund, and you have concerns about the quantitative easing and money printing that's gone on and continues to go on, and you see the, I would call it, increasing frequency of US dollar devaluation, and that concerns you, I think that's when he's saying, then maybe Bitcoin's for you. Yes, you'll probably make some money on it, but more importantly, you will shelter yourself from these potential bad events. So I think he's saying basically for the pessimists out there, or the people that have fear, and I don't know that he's talking to you and I think he's actually talking to Wall Street, actually global financial institutions and investors. I think that's where that comment's coming from. I don't think he means that if you're mowing your lawn today and you think that the economy might end. I don't know that he's speaking to you because you're not a BlackRock client anyway. Right? You need to have at least $1 million net worth liquid in order to even be a BlackRock client. And from the investment. So I again, we're putting conjecture into these statements, but if I'm parsing them out, I think he's speaking to multiple crowds at once.
That's a really good point, Chad. Like, yeah, who is he speaking to? Who is this message for? I mean, he is aware that he's on national television and this is, this is being watched. And yeah, for sure. Like he's not talking here to the average income earner. Like that's not.
No, and I don't think he wants to use it. Yeah, exactly. And I don't think he wants to use America or China or any particular set of circumstances as an example, because listen, globally, all over the world, powerful people listen to every word he says. So I think he's trying to be purposely vague and yet send a message as well.
So like the message is like, this is not anymore a speculative asset to make a quick buck. This is now this has become a safe haven for you. And yeah.
I think when he references digital gold, he's said that in other interviews as well. I think they look at this as a technical gold. Yeah.
Right, which has not yet even found its actual price, I would argue.
Right.
Like this is like what we always say, that you see fluctuation because it's still looking for its price. It's still not.
It's still in discovery mode for sure. Yeah.
Let's back it up a little bit just to not to lose what his stream of thought is.
As one of the asset classes that we all look at, I look at it as digital gold, as I said before, and I do believe there's a real need for everyone to look at it as one alternative to, I would say, the optimism that I have in the world. If you want to hedge hope, Bitcoin is not an instrument for hope unless you're hopeful you're going to make a lot of money on it. But I look at it as a vehicle in which you're expressing your financial acumen in something that you're more frightened of the world, you're more frightened of your existence. And I believe there's a great industrial use for it. And I think a lot of people are missing that.
I couldn't agree more. I changed my mind about it when you did. You had been my thinking. It was like, you don't believe in it, so I can't believe it. I want to thank Larry Fink for the message of optimism.
Saying there's an industrial use for it? That was a little bit cryptic at the end. What did he mean there? What do you think?
Yeah, well, again, I think this goes back to, we've talked about this briefly, I think, in a couple of other podcasts, but I think it goes back to things like mining being used to actually manage energy grids in some countries. I can't remember if it was, I believe it was Sweden that uses it. Famously, of course, Texas uses the Bitcoin mining operations to manage their energy grid and help stabilize that grid. And then a more recent interesting example would be El Salvador, who has now commenced Bitcoin mining using the energy from the off-gassing of the volcanoes in El Salvador. And so instead of that energy being wasted, they're mining Bitcoin and building equity and a nest egg from energy that was otherwise just being wasted. There's probably many other things that he's aware of that I'm not, just because of his contacts and his reach globally. But if he's making that statement, I think it's probably starting with just a few things that we are aware of, and probably delving into many other things that at this point we're not even aware of.
I mean,
It's a
there's
pretty
still,
bold statement.
yeah.
No, that's all I was gonna say.
Yeah, there's, I mean, as you said, we're probably going to have a session on that in the future in terms of energy and Bitcoin. And okay, now I get it. Like, why is he saying industrial use? And apparently he's dropping another hint there, because for a layperson, you go like, what is he even talking about? But that's now it sort of like makes sense. And because it's so interesting, like also that narrative is going to change more and more from Bitcoin is this evil consumer of excess of energy, yeah, right? It's just wasting energy and precious energy, which we could use somewhere else, and we actually have to conserve that to actually Bitcoin is something which stabilizes the electric grid, or even can be used to yeah, farm energy in very remote locations where otherwise it just wouldn't be profitable to yeah, generate energy. So that's
Right.
another model there, and a lot of people don't know that. So we have to look into that in more detail. So it's interesting that he just mentions that. Maybe he mentioned this to like do another wink there to say, well, there's another area where you could invest in the industrial
Right.
use if you're interested in
Yep.
that aspect, because it just doesn't have enough time.
Well, and to your point, Luke, actually, that's a great point I hadn't thought of. But BlackRock holds sizable shares in the top 5 Bitcoin mining operations in the world. And they've held those for years. So the ETF might be new for them, but they've been invested in mining for a number of years. So again, it's not my area of specialty, but what I would say is they know a lot, and what he has time to say on national television and in that spot, and what they know are probably two different things. The fact that he even mentioned it in a 2-minute spot means that again, I think he's sending a message to the investment crowd that, as you said, hey, there's other stuff going on here, and email me or call me or whatever, and we'll talk.
Yeah, ask me the question. What do you mean by industrial use? You just said that,
Yeah.
and what do you mean? Is that another thing I should
Right.
put my money
Yeah.
there? And
Yeah.
and probably he'll, I don't know, speculation, but if you look at developments in the United States, and we're just going to look at this as another point, maybe that's where there is even more of a future market when it comes to Bitcoin mining. If we look at the recent developments there in terms of what certain presidential candidates said. Yeah.
Yeah, and just going back to last week's podcast, for anybody that missed it, go check it out, or our most recent podcast anyway. Former Speaker of the House mentioning that there was other uses politically for Bitcoin. So I think this all kind of falls into different people are now looking at this, different powerful and influential people are looking at this in a completely different way than they probably did 4 or 5 years ago, and through a different lens.
Talking about influential people, we have another piece of news here. So this was fairly recent, this interview, right? We can see also that it was recent because of the graph showing the price of Bitcoin in the background. So this just happened. And we have another news here from Forbes from July 3rd. So that's a little bit, but he says, Trump sparks talks of Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset. What?
Yeah.
We just heard the term digital gold, and we know the US dollar as the reserve currency of the world and all that. And now suddenly we get more terminology, talks of Bitcoin as a strategic reserve currency, reserve asset. What and here it is, like he says, we want all the remaining Bitcoin to be made in the United States. That might be the industrial use Larry Fink was just speaking of. I don't know, could be. You were just giving us the background. I thought that was very interesting, that BlackRock is also invested in Bitcoin mining, and maybe that shows that this could be if a future market with high potential. If Trump says that, and maybe he's going to be president, we want all the remaining Bitcoin to be made in the United States.
Well, and I think, and again, this goes back to previous conversations that you and I have speculated on. But the United States, like it or not, has heavily incentivized to keep the US dollar being the dominant currency of the world and the world reserve asset. It's as simple as that. And I think they see crypto at large being the stable coins that we talked about in our last podcast, and Bitcoin, not necessarily in the same bucket, but parallel to, hey, we're moving to a technological world. Well, we've actually already moved there, but government moves slowly. And how do we maintain our dominance in a digital society the way that we did during the basically the 20th century, maybe the latter part of the 19th century, and throughout the 20th century, with manufacturing, industrial, gold, how do we keep that dominance moving forward? And who are our competitors for that dominance? And of course, we all know that China is probably the US's current #1 competitor. And so I think there's some 3D or 4D chess going on here with many things, semiconductors being another one. But I think some people are starting to look at Bitcoin and say, hey, if we do this and we do that, financially speaking, this will help stabilize the US dollar's dominance moving into a digital world. Again, speculation on my part, but RFK Jr.'s brought this up. Paul Ryan, the former Speaker of the House, brought it up a few weeks ago. Vivek Ramaswamy has talked about it. So these are fairly powerful, relatively intelligent, powerful, influential people. And some of them are also financially, have a lot of clout as well. So it's the fact that we're even having these discussions, or more importantly, we're discussing what they're discussing, is amazing considering, that Bitcoin is, for all intents and purposes, less than 15 years old.
Right. I'm just repeating here also what you just said from the article, that RFK Jr. said or suggested a small percentage of the US Treasury bills should be backed by hard currency, by gold, silver, platinum, or Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And probably it's going to go into the direction of Bitcoin if ever that plan comes to fruition. And here it's more specific. I just read that Senator Cynthia Lummis, I don't know if that's
Lummis,
Lummis, if that's how you pronounce, is another proponent of using Bitcoin to better the nation's finances. In February 2022, she suggested that the Federal Reserve diversity the 40 billion in foreign currency that it held on its balance sheet by adding Bitcoin. Well, why not? Right? So why not just diversify? Hasn't happened yet, but that seems to be part of the plan. And she continues to see benefits in holding the digital currency as part of the nation's financial portfolio. Wow. So that's what we, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, all I was going to do is add to your comment. So if there are people in high-ranking government office in the US, at least hypothesizing about this, what's happening in other countries? And more importantly, if I run a sovereign wealth fund and I see the Americans starting to contemplate something that I'm not in, that I want to be in that too. And so it's not just what they're talking about or even thinking, it's what effect does that have on other, what would you call them, entities around the world that also are playing in this game, this high finance, high political power game that these people play in. And so when I look at Bitcoin, I think to myself, at least the future of Bitcoin, I think if the US government is now starting to talk openly about it, and look, there's plenty of people that are opposed to these ideas as well. So let's not pretend for a second that it's going to happen tomorrow. But when the leading presidential candidate talks about it, when another presidential candidate talks about it, when sitting US senators talk about it, when the former Speaker of the House talks about it. This is going to be something that raises eyebrows all around the world. And I think, and I don't even want to contemplate getting into Donald Trump's brain, but I think when he makes a comment like that, what he's really saying is, if there's something here, we want to make sure that we control it, not China. You know, so if I'm in China now, what are they trying to control? Like maybe we want some of that too. And of course, we already know that Hong Kong opened up Bitcoin trading last summer, and their ETF, I think, launches this summer. We can pretend that Hong Kong is not truly connected to China, but if Hong Kong's doing it, somebody high up in the Chinese government okayed it. So it's interesting. There seems to be, again, like I said, some type of chess going on politically or geopolitically, with Bitcoin being part of the conversation.
And here, like, there's this interview with the head of a firm-wide research, the head of firm-wide research, Galaxy Digital, and he says just what I was thinking while you were talking. He said, what started as hobbyists using their home computers has elevated to industrial manufacturing, institutional portfolios, and corporate balance sheets. There's every reason to believe that the Bitcoin network layer will expand further to include nation states, which is that nation states will start to have Bitcoin and own Bitcoins and see this as a strategic reserve asset. And that was just, it's interesting that he made this statement, because I was just thinking, that is actually what was predicted in the Bitcoin standard. Again, that, first.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah.
We don't get any profit from this book, but the truth of the matter is the blueprint for all this was laid out years ago in the Bitcoin standard. For anybody who's interested, you can get a copy of it online for probably $10, a hard copy probably $20 or $30. Get yourself a copy, read it cover to cover, and then read it again. Pretty much everything that was laid out as to what they thought was going to happen is, by the looks of it, unfolding. And we're now at the nation state conversation stage.
Right.
The
conversation has started.
Yeah.
And it's shifting from, this is a horrible idea, and this is only something, this is funny money, to, oh, this is like digital gold, and something which the United States definitely has to be involved in, and every Bitcoin needs to be mined in the United States. That's, of course, now the words only of Donald Trump. As you said, there's still opponents to this, but the conversation is shifting. And I just also find this interesting statement about exponential gold. Were Bitcoin to achieve parity with gold's current market cap, a single Bitcoin would be approximately $700,000. And that also needs to sink in, because Bitcoin, I don't know if it's now at the market capitalization of silver again, or if it is again above silver. It had surpassed silver when it was at the last all-time high, so I'm not quite sure where it sits now. And I don't know, like, I try to explain this to somebody and then their eyes just glaze over. But that's also something which I think of as like, that's incredible that we're already at this stage. Like, there's Bitcoin now globally has the same value as silver globally.
Yes.
And if it goes further up and would have the same level as gold, that's what they're talking about, then one Bitcoin would be $700,000. And it's not, this doesn't say that it stops there. It could still rise higher than the market capitalization of gold. So that's what he's saying there.
Yeah, it's amazing. And silver's been around for thousands of years.
Right. And Bitcoin has not.
No.
So that's a good point.
Yeah. But Bitcoin's younger than my youngest child. So
okay,
it's amazing the growth that this technology has had in the last 15 years, and I would argue the last 5 or 6 exponentially. Yeah.
Okay, here they're just going to El Salvador, MicroStrategy and all that, but I think we get the idea what is meant by a strategic reserve asset. It's like, as Senator Loomis suggested to that, the Federal Reserve puts also Bitcoin on its balance sheets, not just foreign currencies. And just imagine if that happens, right? So
yeah, and there's a pretty strong belief in the Bitcoin community that sovereign wealth funds have already started accumulating. There's the nickname is called Mr. 100, but there's some entity in the world that buys 100 Bitcoin a day, like clockwork, almost every day.
All right.
And for a few days or even a few weeks, you could say, well, that's a wealthy individual, or maybe that's an exchange. But at this amount of time now, the amount of money they've invested far exceeds that of any individual or even an exchange. It can only be a sovereign wealth fund or a country itself. It's possible a central bank is doing it, but it's more likely it's a sovereign wealth fund, because sovereign wealth fund would have far less people to explain their actions to than a central bank.
Here's just maybe I just need to recommend everybody to read through this article itself, because here it mentions again this connection between stable coins and U.S. Treasury bills, and how stable coins are actually propping up
U.S. dollar, yeah.
U.S. dollar, and that's part of this article, but that's basically not our subject anymore. And yeah, as you said, maybe there are already countries, or could be very likely that there are already countries buying Bitcoin at this moment. We just don't know it yet. And then comes the big surprise, because if that news breaks, then of course this will have a great impact on the price of Bitcoin. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Anyway, what was interesting news? I think we're out of time, but it was a really interesting session as always. And thanks for sending me that video. That was it's always mind-blowing what is happening in the crypto space. So, and thanks for all your all the background to that.
Yeah, no, my pleasure, and thanks for doing this, and stay safe, stay healthy.
Stay safe. All right, take care.
Don't worry.
Don't worry. No, no more. No worries. Okay, talk to you soon.
All right.